Thanks. Dr. Jaishankar, I'd like to give you a chance to comment on lots of interesting things that have just been said, but also maybe chuck in an extra element, which is Donald Trump. Any discussion of world affairs comes back to him. How much, have you been surprised by the direction of his second term? A lot of people, when he was re-elected, said, okay, we kind of know what he's like. We've seen him in office before, but is this a different Trump that we're dealing with the second time around?
I'll take the easier one first.
Yeah.
Sure. The thoughts which are going on. Let me pick up on two things which Lana said. I think the truth is, to a great deal, everybody has that sense of it's not my war. We don't admit it at times, but it's very natural, because at the end of the day, the more stakes you have, the closer it is to you, the more vested you are. It's your war. And for somebody else, the further away they are, it's not their war. I think there needs to be a degree of understanding of that. And the expectation that, my war, as I said, I've had this statement thrown back at me repeatedly. So I don't repeat, I don't want to dwell on it too far. But I think the expectation that in the sense Ukraine, because it is so strong in Europe's calculus, is therefore shared by the rest of the world to the same degree, is no more reasonable than the rest of the world. Each region would have its own priorities. So again, because we keep coming back to Russian oil, look, when we didn't buy significant amount of Russian oil till 2022. Circumstances compelled us to get into that market. And I must say, the Russians have been steady suppliers because they put the cargoes out there, and you go out there and buy oil, whichever is the most reasonable and available oil. But I do want people to remember this. At that time, the US specifically asked India to buy Russian oil to stabilize the world markets. Yeah. Okay. Right now, if you see, after having first put tariffs on us last year for buying Russian oil, the US then again lifted its sanctions
because
on Russian oil.
They need the oil price down again. Yeah.
So let's not pretend that there is some great principle involved here. I mean, if it is on, off, and, do it when it suits us and don't do it when it doesn't suit us. I mean, come on, we are all adults in the room. We know what the game is. So I don't think making this about sanctimony is really warranted. Okay.
Well, if you don't like sanctimony, then Donald Trump's your guy. He's very frank about. But
wait, hang on. I have one other point.
Yeah, please.
And that's the resilience point. Because you asked me saying, what are you doing other than, what can you do other than being a frustrated observer? Well, I think, look, there are immediate responses. There are short-term, medium-term responses. What, for example, we heard from Lana is UAE, for example, is de-risking by trying to build alternative evacuation routes for its energy. So what we're going to see to some degree is the Gulf itself de-risk the Gulf. Okay. To some extent, the rest of the world will work with the region also to build redundancy, and the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, is envisaged as one such initiative. But the third one, which is really interesting, I cite my own country as an example. Today, our largest oil supplier, little less than 40% is Russia. Our largest gas supplier is the United States. And that was not the case till the 28th of February of this year. The main supplier was Qatar.
Sure.
So what is happening is the world is also de-risking on the region. People are looking for alternative energy sources and saying, okay, I'm prepared to buy at longer distance, maybe at a higher cost, but there is a greater security about it, predictability about it. So what I see in a way is that the global energy scenario will fundamentally change after this. Now, I'm not unidimensional. I'm not saying, for example, in India's case, our relationship with the Gulf is only about oil. As I said, we have many other factors, including people, talent, skills, business, security. But definitely, the way the energy flows were on the 27th of February before this war started, is going to be significantly different, possibly irreversibly different, once this phase is over. So in an interesting way, just like the Ukraine conflict changed the energy flows for this region, what the Iran conflict is going to do is probably change the energy flows for Asia, certainly, possibly for much of the world. Your question
Yes.
on Trump, I was coming to that. Look, it is natural that people would extrapolate from one term to another. But it is also a fact that the second term, the politics of the second term was significantly different. And I think the politics of that and how America itself and American, sort of institutions and systems have reacted to that has been extrapolated onto the rest of the world. In a sense, the answer is a kind of a yes and a kind of a no. I think what the first term and the run-up to the election had shown us was that there would be a very high degree of change. Okay, and you have to kind of acknowledge it, that much of what happened was actually declared in advance. Tariffs, for example. It's just that a world accustomed to its habits did not actually think this would be carried out. This is rhetoric, but it won't become policy, or policy would not become practice. In that sense, I would say all of us were braced for a term where there would be very significant departures from the past, even from his first term. But I think probably most of us, I really can't think of anybody who was not, did not probably expect it to be as radical as it turned out to be. Now, some countries and some situations have felt it less. I mean, in our case, for example, we are not an alliance partner, so it didn't impact our security the way it would do to a NATO country or a bilateral treaty partner. There would be, countries who in other areas were all affected, like in tariffs. There would be some countries who were more affected on, say, immigration. So pick the issue and you would get, the world was unevenly impacted. But absolutely, I think all said and done, the world really did not see the intensity of that departure from previous policies in the second term.
Yeah, and Minister Naseba, I guess, Donald Trump, as we're just hearing, he's surprised us in many ways, continues to surprise us. And I think one of many states in your region, even if they were suspicious of Iran, were surprised by the US-Israeli attack and not particularly pleased that they weren't consulted in advance. But now the war's going on. I mean, we were hearing earlier that it's a mistake to say the Gulf. Everyone's reacting the same way. People have different views. And the UAE, rightly or wrongly, you tell us, is regarded as the most hawkish of the Gulf states, as the one that says, okay, this war's started, now we've got to kind of finish the job. And people are very intrigued by the closeness of your relationship with Israel. So tell us about it.
I think, different countries had different risk appetites in the response to what was an unprovoked Iranian aggression on a number of Gulf countries, but also Jordan after the beginning of US-Israeli operations. And you're right, we were surprised. And you are also right that we were doing a lot prior to February 28th to try to make sure such an escalation didn't happen. I myself was in Tehran 3 weeks prior to the 28th of Feb, meeting with the foreign minister and other senior officials in the foreign ministry to talk about the last decade of our foreign policy, which was really trending towards economic incentives for Iran's integration into the region. In the same way that we had also, I think, in a step change for regional policy in 2020, joined the Abraham Accords, reverting decades of a stalemated Arab position and trying to also incentivize Israel, not only for a different economic integration into the region and a bilateral partnership with us and the other Abraham Accord countries, but also to understand that the full comprehensive peace dividend could also be achieved through the two-state solution for the Palestinian people also and self-determination. So trying to change the script in that way. I think the jury's still out on both of those initiatives. Obviously, Iran's unprovoked attacks on us and other GCC countries has, as Dr. Jaishankar said, galvanized the regions in ways that some of which we've absorbed and some of which we cannot possibly absorb until we're through, I think, this very inflamed period. But there have been some lessons. I think one of them is that obviously, while we trend towards de-escalation, exercising our full rights under Article 51 of the UN Charter in self-defense actually created a deterrence that was needed and has been established. Two, that we continue to play the role of trying to see a pathway through for regional integration of all the countries in the region. I think Dr. Jaishankar's point on diversification of global energy supply, but also corridors for everything from tech to AI to container traffic, whether it's IMEC or I2U2, will pay the peace dividend also of the other relationships, including that with Israel, because we are being given no other alternative. Three, the partnerships with countries are going to be based not necessarily on language or shared history or regional proximity, but on shared vision. And I think this is something that has really come to the fore of UAE foreign policy. So it's been a decade, if we talk about global energy transition, where we have been focused on global energy transition to clean energy in any case, in spite of, without knowing that this war was coming. And we are doubling down on that. It has been a decade where we have been massively invested in AI. We'll be building the biggest AI data center in the UAE outside of the United States in partnership with US tech. That's been a long-term perspective. With India, I remember, and I've seen the dinner table many times, where His Highness Sheikh Abdullah and Dr. Jaishankar decided not only would we sign a free trade agreement with each other, but that we would negotiate and conclude it within 88 days, India and the UAE. And it may seem like an agreement that was negotiated and concluded in 88 days can't have had that much impact, but actually the estimated trade figures and targets of 100 billion in trade has already been exceeded. We've set a new ambitious target of 200 billion by 2032. So I think we're showing that it's not necessarily the regional groupings of the past that determine the outcomes of our future, but it's the shared vision. Yes, okay. We've responded. Sorry, Gideon, go ahead.
Please.
No, so yes, we've responded in a way that I think has asserted a necessary defense, but don't forget we were also under severe attack. But at the same time, we've maintained that the vision that we offer in our country, in our region, the 200 nationalities living there, although we are a small population ourselves, the investments we've made in tech and AI, in diversification, in clean energy, and in education are the right trajectory for the region, not the one that Iran and other countries have pursued that have trended towards funding of state proxies in other countries and other Arab centers, or a ballistic missile weapons program that seems to have been designed to be aimed at regional partners, not at threats further away. And I think that's a fundamental conversation that we have to have with Iran. We hope for a peaceful resolution to this further inflammation, but we hope for one that also deals with some of the fundamental questions. And I think that's what we're now pushing forward today in the de-escalation.
I'm going to do something rather unfair, which is ask you a massive question, give you 2 minutes to answer, because I should also go to the floor. But I was just thinking, as you were talking, that we heard from Minister Valtonen, very unequivocal, Ukraine's got to win, Russia's got to lose. How do you see this war ending? Would you say Iran has to lose, or there has to be some kind of new understanding? How's it end?
I'd like to see the 93 million people of Iran who have a shared history with us, close borders, incredible resources, education, and aspiration achieve a better future for themselves. I'd like to see the people of the UAE flourish and be able to execute their vision of hope and optimism. And I'd like that to be a model that with countries like India and other countries in the region, we build out towards, as opposed to one of conflict and war. I think that's a fundamental human yearning. We've seen it over centuries, that while we have fallen into conflict, we've always trended towards systems and laws that prevent those conflicts. And I think...
But can we get to that lovely endpoint by non-military means, or without violence? I mean, they're not going to agree to that, the regime. They're not going to step aside.
You were talking about the current negotiations.
Yeah.
I think the jury's out on how the negotiations are going. I won't speak for how US officials are seeing it. I think there are some in Iran who are moving towards a negotiating posture. Obviously, there are fundamental issues that they're discussing. I think much like Gaza and the UN Security Council Resolution 2803 that established the Board of Peace and then end to that conflict and the building out of hopefully a roadblock towards eventually a Palestinian entity that takes over Gaza and the West Bank. I think much in the same way, you can't fix it all at once. You have to build out the building blocks. So if the first step is looking at the nuclear program, then looking at ballistic missiles, looking at neighbors and regional security comes later. But you need to begin with something. And I think that's what the negotiations are trying to do.
I've got loads more questions for you, but I'll restrain myself.